Testing 1, 2, 3. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Great to see everybody this morning. Good to be here on this morning. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Great to be here this morning. Great to see everybody out this morning. It has been a minute or two since I've been with you. I've missed you guys the last couple of times that we have met, and it's good to be back to Philly, back to myself. I want to begin by, first of all, just saying I appreciate the prayers and the concerns of those who have been actually praying for me, especially this past week. Coming to find out that I thought I had a real bad case of a virus or something. That's what it felt like initially. Only to come to find out what I was really dealing with was a bad case of food poisoning. And so that was the reaction, or that was the cause of what I was actually dealing with. We had a situation where last week was Teachers Appreciation Week at school, and at Friday, the end of the week, not this past Friday, but the previous Friday, they had Teachers Appreciation, and one of the things that they did to show appreciation was to have one of the popular food trucks come to campus and treat the teachers. And I must say, the food was really good, but the after effects was something else. And the way that they found out about it, last Sunday, I got the feeling, the food truck came on Friday, and then Saturday I got the feeling kind of different, but then Sunday morning I was feeling really different. And then after service I got the feeling really bad, and then it progressively just kind of got worse from there. But called in Monday, didn't go to work, and I wasn't the only one that called in on Monday. We had several teachers that called in on Monday as well. And they got to looking at the similar symptoms that everybody was expressing. And then only come to find out, they also checked the same food truck had another school, came to another school the day before on Thursday. And that school ended up having a epidemic of teachers calling in sick, so they were able to kind of trace the call. It's one of your popular food trucks. I don't want to give them a bad name. One of the things, right? We did notify the health department. Health department notified the food truck, and it's one of your favorites. What's one of the? They do sell street tacos. They do sell street tacos. Okay. And food preparation, it's not that they do anything unsanitary. One of the things when you move from a regulated state, like your restaurants have to adhere to certain standards, when it comes to food preparation, that kind of thing, you gotta, that's why at certain people's houses I watch, not that they, you gotta be careful in terms of good food preparation. Salmonella poisoning and that kind of thing is very easily, if you don't know what you're doing in terms of just cooking properly. So anyway, that was what was happening there. And so, but I appreciate all the prayers and concerns. It's good to be back. Want to mention a couple of things. Brother Thurman Meadows is going to come lead us in a song, and then we're going to get right into our class on this morning. We're going to have him lead the song, and after leading the song, we're going to ask the Brother Ray Gale lead us in a prayer following this song. Brother.
My God is good.
Oh, Lord. We know the song now, though. Y'all want me to teach a little bit? All right, cool. Y'all were ready for it. That's all it was.
My God is good, good, good. God is good. Oh, God is good, good, good. God, yeah, God is good, good. Yeah, God is good, good. Yeah, God. Oh, my God is good, good. Yeah, God. My God is good, good. Yeah, my God is good. Yeah, good. Oh, God. Yeah, my God is good. Yeah, good. Oh, one more time. My God is good. Yeah, good. Yeah, God. My God is good, good. God is good. Amen.
Amen, Brother Miguel.
Let's go to God in prayer. Our gracious Heavenly Father, we come to you this morning just to give you thanks for the many blessings. Father, we just come this morning to honor you, to praise you, and to worship you. Lord, we come this morning to just thank you for keeping everybody safe on yesterday during the storm that we had. I'm so grateful that no harm or danger has come to anyone. I just ask you to be with each family that's affected, Lord, that you continue to strengthen them, to give them courage, to know that you are there, and that they know that you are God and you will provide for them. Lord, as we come this morning, we also ask that you be with one of our sisters that was in this class that's transitioned out of town, as Sister Rosemary asked. We just ask you to continue to be with her, continue to strengthen her, that you continue to heal her body, that you'll be with her and her family. While as we go further in this class, we just ask that you be with Brother Jackson, as he brings another portion of your word that will help us discover our purpose that you have created for us. Lord, we're just so thankful and grateful for all that you do. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. I love that song. God is good. He is good, right? Testament to that, I'm glad Brother Ray Gill kind of mentioned in the prayers, even as it last, the night before last. The storm comes through, the city the way that it did, at the time that it did, it could have been really more of a catastrophe than it actually was. We're so thankful that those who were affected, that we live in a community where we respond appropriately to help relieve the burdens of those when necessary in times like these. But more importantly, we're glad also that those who are among us who lived in that vicinity, God was good in terms of extending his protection. And so God is good. I want to begin by first of all thanking Brother Bailey for doing just a fabulous job the last two classes. Let's give him a lovely positive for the class, leading us on in class the last couple of times that we met. And I communicated with him. I want to kind of begin to kind of take off from where you guys have been the last couple of times. We are now in chapter 3. We've looked at chapter 3. I want to kind of emphasize a couple of things this morning from chapter 3 as we prepare to go to chapter 4. If you've noticed, chapter 3 sets the foundational groundwork for the next several chapters that we will be studying. Chapter 3 lays the context for the 5 contexts of purpose discovery. Chapter 3 talks about 5 contexts that we're going to begin studying individually in terms of purpose discovery. Now, the thing that we want to make sure that we have a clear understanding on is why the author begins with in chapter 3, he gives an overview of the importance of these 5 contexts. Now, in my own words, what I have tagged chapter 3 and the 5 contexts to mean is this. These 5 contexts will bring about a new awareness of divine orchestration. The 5 contexts of purpose discovery can be looked at as a new awareness of divine orchestration. We want to make sure that each one of us understand, even though we've heard the language before in terms of the context of your crisis. But what I'm wanting us to know from the outset, that it is imperative that each one of us know the importance of what it means to understand each one of these contexts as it relates to discovering God's purpose for your life. And so therefore, what I want to begin by going back to chapter 3, and let's all turn to page number 28 in your book, and I want to read a section there that emphasizes this important point. Chapter 3, actually, page 30 in chapter 3. Page 30. Page 30 in chapter 3. The author writes at the top of the page, he mentions the significance of contextual setting. The significance of contextual study. He writes, before we examine the 5 lights of purpose discovery, we need to briefly discuss the significance of contextual settings. John DeGruchy, in his book, Theology and Ministry in Context of Crisis, says, all ministry is contextual and set in particular crisis. He claims that context without a sense of crisis produces emptiness and complacency. And crises without context produces alienation, lack of direction, and no purpose. Now here's the part where I want us to really focus on these next comments. Similarly, God's purpose always finds, let's repeat that. God's purpose always finds its application in the context of people's painful needs and crisis. Let's repeat that again. God's purpose always finds its application in the context of people's painful needs and crisis. That's why it's critically important for us to be able to understand. In order to understand, if we're really interested in knowing what our purpose is, if we miss this important point right here, you'll miss discovering, you'll miss understanding how to discover God's purpose in your life. Okay? So, he goes on to write, when people forget context and crises, they turn abstract, detached, ideological, remote, and unhelpful. God's purpose is bound to our needs and crisis, and when we omit either one, we lose our sense of purpose. Okay? Let's take a moment and pause. The statement that I had us to repeat. Similarly, God's purpose always finds its application in the context of people's painful needs and crisis. What does that statement say? God's purpose always finds its application in the context of people's painful needs and crisis. What does that say? Brother Whiteley, go right ahead.
I think to the reader, if you read that, it's saying that in all your problems, all your crisis situations, there is
Say that again, Brother White. Can we get the camera on him, Brother Bailey?
As we look at our crisis situations, our problems, there will always be a purpose in them. So as a reader into the text there, we have to be the finder of that purpose in that crisis.
All right. Okay. Very good. Anybody else? Sister Joseph.
It made me think of that is, we have to go through crisis. We must go through crisis to get to a purpose. It takes a lot of experiences, difficulties, and crises before we can get to a purpose. So that is a learning process that we have to go through, our crisis.
Oh, okay. Everybody hear what she said? Okay. Sister Joseph just stated, restate the first part of your statement, Sister Joseph, again.
I said, it seemed like what I was thinking, that we need to go through all these different crises, several crises before we can get to a purpose. And there's a learning process in each step that we go through.
We need to go through crisis, okay,
To get to a purpose.
to get to our purpose. But notice this statement here. Similarly, God's purpose always finds its application in the context of people's painful need. Who in the room this morning has never experienced a painful situation in their life? Who in the room have never experienced a painful situation in their life? Nobody? Everybody then, that's something we all share in common, is it not? Yes? Okay. Now, who in the room can remember how soon after being born into this world did it take you as a human being to experience some type of painful situation or crisis in your life? How long did it take from birth to whatever before you experience, you can recollect your earliest painful experience as a person? Did it take very long?
About 5 years.
About 5. Notice that. Here's one person. From the time that they were born, before they reached the age of 5 years old, they can remember the first painful experience that they had in their life. Without even knowing what that experience is, in order for the memory, how old are you right now, sister?
59.
At 59 years old, in order for her to be able to almost instantaneously go back and recall that moment in time, it tells me, without even knowing the situation, that it had to be a very painful situation.
I lost my mother.
Okay. It was the passing of her mother. Passing of her mother. Passing of her mother. Okay? Now, I'm going to read the statement one more time. God's purpose always finds its application. God's purpose, and we're all here on the journey of purpose discovery, right? So God's purpose always finds its what? Its application. Its application. So whatever my purpose is, even if I don't know it right now, here is one real key to understanding what it might be. Its application always will find itself in a person's painful need and crisis. Got 2 questions. How did pain, what's responsible for pain entering into the world that we live anyway? We just established the fact that, first of all of us, universally, without exception, have the experience of having, at some point in time in our life, to deal with some type of painful situation. All right? Now, it's important to also always keep in mind that that reality is not a reality just unique to you as an individual. This is a human reality. So the question then is, where did this reality find its origin to where it becomes an experience of every human being? Where did pain, sister?
Pain came into the world through sin in the garden.
All right. Pain came through. We got to keep this in mind. So when we talk about pain in our life and how that God how that pain in our life and the statement that we just read, God's purpose always finds its application where? In pain and what? Did y'all write it down? And pain and crisis. We have to deal with pain, all humankind, as a result of sin that entered into the world. What happened to the world as a result of sin entering into the world? What did that do to all of mankind? It brought pain.
It was corrupted.
It was corrupted. It corrupted. It brought pain. It corrupted. It tried to distort the purpose that God originally had when He created the world. Sin tried to hinder God's original purpose that He had in mind when He created the world. When Adam sinned, it almost appeared to be, at that moment in time, the most tragic thing that could have ever happened. The consequences of sin is that pain and corruption and the like and all of the symptoms of a person being disconnected from who God is begin to be unleashed into the world that we now live in. Okay? But the brilliance of God, I said the brilliance of God. God, in His infinite wisdom, uses the very thing that attempted to usurp His original purpose to bring His purpose back into line in terms of His original intent from the beginning. So the thing that was attempted to distort and destroy the purpose of God, God uses that same method now to restore the purpose of God. Your most painful experience in your life is designed to bring you, to give you the most power that you've ever experienced in your life. And in restoring the power to you in your life, it's designed for you to fulfill your purpose that God has designed for you in your life. Somebody ought to say amen. That's why, as we go a little further, what we need to understand is that these 5 contexts, as you look at them again, and the thing about pain and crises, the tricky thing about that is many people do not like to deal with the realities of the pain that they have occurred in their life. We run from it. Because the devil has actually used the painful situations, the crisis situations in our life, to bring about these negative emotions that we'll talk about as we begin to look at each one of the contexts. Things like shame, things like embarrassment, things like resentment, things like unforgiveness, all of those things that came as a result of the way that we have perceived those things to be. Okay? But what we're going to learn, and we've already begun this journey, we got to look at these contexts as a new awareness of divine orchestration. In other words, our context of our creation, our calling, our crisis, our cross, our career, and the like has been God's divine orchestration leading us to the purpose in which He created us to be. Y'all, everybody there? Okay. So, any questions? Let me pause. Any questions about any questions or comments about anything that we've covered here? Okay? No? Okay. All right. Here's the next thing I want to mention. I'm gonna lay a couple of just thoughts. I'm trying to whet your appetite, and whatever you do, if you're not teaching on Wednesday, you're not going to want to miss Wednesday's class. You're not going to want to miss Wednesday. And then if you happen to miss Wednesday, you're going to want to make sure that you go to our channel and catch up on what you missed. Now, here's the key to what is understanding these 5 contexts. Here's what you need to understand. Where you've been, oh shit, I didn't catch that. Not where you've been. Okay. Where you've been is the secret to where you're going. Okay. That's why these 5 contexts are so critical in terms of how God's understanding, God's divine orchestration in our lives. We will go on a journey, but you're going to have to be willing. I'm going to tell you, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge for you and me alike to really begin to embrace each one of your contexts as we go down this road. But to do so, here's what you need to know. To do so is the secret to where you're going in your life with God, or where God has purpose for you to go, your destiny. Everybody, let's stop right there. Any questions? Any comments? Where you've been is the secret to where you are going. Or you can, that's the significance of the contextual settings, the 5 contexts of contextual settings, because it's a key. You'll be able to now begin to make sense out of what has already occurred in your life and see how God has used that as a roadmap to where He has been designed to take you in your life. And at the end of that road, you'll find God's purpose. Okay? And so, I used a metaphor the last time I was here, and this is what Wednesday night is going to be like. This will be a constant metaphor that we're going to relate to. I was listening to a program a couple of weeks ago, and they got to talking about mountain climbing, and they used Mount Everest. They was talking about Mount Everest, which is the highest mountain in the world, and how that there are people who climb Mount Everest, and up until just real recent history, not very many people have ever did it. We got more people. I think there's now, since 50 something, there's about 1,500 people now that have done it. There are several hundred people who have died attempting to do it. And now on an annual basis, there are about 600 people a year that actually scale Mount Everest. But as I began to listen to the story, it had so many similar parallels to the Christian life and the Christian walk in terms of one pursuing, trying to discover your purpose in life. And so we're going to use this metaphor, and I'm going to close with this. Climbing Mount Everest takes about 7 to 8 weeks to climb. Okay? And it's not that the reason that it takes 7 weeks is that there's not a direct ascent from actually where you see there's a base camp. The base camp is not the foot of the mountain. You got to climb to a certain part to what has been established as a base camp. Okay? So that's not the base of the mountain. You got to at least get to a place where there's an established base camp before you actually start climbing. Okay? And then the top of the mountain, this class represents the cycle by which all of us have gone through in terms of the the assembly line process, and this class will end. This will be our base camp. But not only that, there will be things that we have already discussed that we will continue to come back to, like these hikers who are attempting to climb Mount Everest. And what happens with Mount Everest is once you reach the base camp, once you get to the base camp, you spend several days at the base camp. And the reason being, as you go higher up to the summit, the air gets thinner. And your body needs time to really adjust to the high altitude and the low oxygen level. So what happens is you go from the base camp to Camp 1. And when you get to Camp 1, you spend 3 to 4 nights at Camp 1. But before proceeding to Camp 2, you hike back down to the base camp before ascending to Camp 2. And the reason you go back down to Camp 1, that it's necessary for your body to become reacclimated to the conditions and strengthen itself more before you ascend on to Camp number 3. And when you get to Camp 3, it necessitates you again, before you go to Camp 4, of descending back down to base camp, and then to Camp 1, and then to Camp 2. And what that illustrates is this: that is necessary for us to pause at different times to adjust before God was really ready to take us to another level. Let me give you an illustration, and I'm going to quit with this thought. We have already covered some things in chapter 1 and chapter 2. I'm talking about spiritual insight, that before we go further, we need to descend back to and really develop. There are certain things in our spirit that we've already covered that needs time for reflective thinking in order to produce what that spiritual concept is designed to do. And once that's established, when God takes you to, you'll see what I'm saying. As we go through these different contexts and we begin to look at some of the contexts in light of, as you revisit them now, it's going to impact you probably like they've never impacted you before in your life. And if your inward systems have not been acclimated correctly, you won't be ready to continue to ascend like God is purposing you to do in your spiritual growth. Okay?